All right, well, welcome to the third episode of the Second Service podcast. We're excited that you're joining us today, and we have a great guest with us, Matt. Who are we talking to today?
Today, we're speaking with Terry McGovern, who is a business professor at the University of Wisconsin-Parkside. He recently ran for the state house in Iowa as the Democratic representative. He's also an alum of the program, the master's program that we're currently in. And he agreed to sit down and speak with us for a little bit, and then we are excited to get into it.
Yeah, we're going to talk to him a little bit about his process, his experience running, and a lot more. So thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoy our chat with Terry McGovern. All right. Thanks for joining us for the Second Service podcast. Today we have Terry McGovern, our good friend from the MAPL program, joining us. And we're excited to chat with you. And I want to kick it off by one of the stories that I read in your bio that I found so fascinating, and I didn't know this. Can you tell us a little bit about the World War II veteran that you met that encouraged you to see all 50 states? And tell us a little bit about which maybe some of your favorite memories from that trip were, and maybe some not so favorite memories. But I just kind of honed in on that and thought, man, that is just such a fascinating thing to have accomplished and checked off. And just want to hear a little bit more about that story as we start this interview with you.
Yeah, sure. So when I was a young man in high school, I worked at a summer camp in East Troy, Wisconsin. This was a Catholic summer camp. And one of the gentlemen who worked there was a Cherokee by the name of Red Cheek. He was also a World War II Marine. Well, one morning we were at breakfast, and this camp had students from across the world. And we had a French student who was going on about bragging about how much France was so much more beautiful than the United States. And Red Cheek was listening to this. And at this time, I think Red Cheek must have been in his late 60s. And finally, after the young Frenchman goes on a little bit farther, Red Cheek slams his fist down and he says, "I've had enough of you bashing my beautiful country." And then he went on to explain how he had been to France during World War II and how, he had helped rescue them in that war, and he's seeing their country. And then he pointed the finger at all the American kids, and he said, "You American kids have no business seeing any other country until you've visited all 50 states of our own." So I didn't take a single trip. It's been over, the course of 30 years that it took me to visit all 50 states. And a number of those happened while I was on active duty. And I agree with Red Cheek. I mean, every state has something beautiful to offer. And people in the military know this, that no matter where you're stationed, your attitude going into where you're stationed will make a huge difference on how that assignment goes, and then what you decide to make of the local surroundings. And I've been blessed. I was stationed I tell people my military career started on the West Coast at Vandenberg Air Force Base in California, and then it ended on the East Coast. My last assignment was in D.C. At National Defense University.
One of the questions we always get into with our guests is getting to the bottom of what motivated them to run. And you're just coming off of your recent campaign experience.
Yep.
Because there's a lot of people as you know, a lot of people in the MAPL program that thought is going through their head. Like, do I have what it takes? Do I want to put myself through that? Do I put my family through something like that? And we're just interested in hearing your motivation for doing what you did. And then, we can get into like your experience overall and kind of your big takeaways, but start with kind of why.
Sure. So here in Iowa for the last 6 years, and that'll be the next 2 years as well, we've been a very red state. And, I think well, I can't speak for all military members, but for me personally, if I had to choose between going to the desert or going into politics, I would take the desert. Thank you very much. And I think that's many military would have this sort of cringe factor when they think about entering into the political arena. But at the same time, this is what we do. This is what veterans do. I mean, part of the legend and lore that I've always enjoyed about the Air Force was bragging about how bad your base housing was compared to your friends. And so I think that there is this idea of second service and, going to where you're needed, no matter how difficult it might be. And when you have a military family, they sort of get that too. That when you dedicate your life and when you spend 20 years in the Air Force, it's a career. You dedicate your life to service, and that idea of, participating and being part of something that's far greater than yourself. The family comes to learn this, embrace this as well, because they're part of it. And so what really motivated me to run in Iowa is, I tell people the only thing worse than a two-party system is a one-party system. And we've been under a one-party system for 6 years. It's gotten to the point where the party in charge, they don't even debate. They don't take input from the other party. It's just very much one-sided. And that concerned me. That's not democracy. And so I wanted to really get involved, win or lose, to be a voice out there to create debate and to help people think about these issues from a different perspective. Now, I've always been an independent voter. I was never, when I was on active duty, I never voted. I felt like it was a conflict of interest. So when I finally decided to run, I literally had to sit down and sort of do a personal, analysis, a lot of internal thought. What do I believe in? What are my values? What do my parents teach me? And in that process, I always knew my dad was a strong Democrat. Dad's a blue collar Teamster truck driver. What I didn't know was his father, a farmer, also strong Democrat, several of his family members. And so as I start to study the issues and try to look at them from both sides, as a moderate, you're right there. And sometimes it can be a coin toss in terms of which side of the fence do you go on. But ultimately, I decided that the brunt of my values lean towards the democratic principles. And so that's what I decided to run as. And yeah, that motivation to get out there, it's almost a duty, an obligation I felt. As a member of my committee, if I don't go forward, who will? And in terms of being qualified, well, I'll tell you, I had an experience when I was on active duty, jumping out of airplanes at the Air Force Academy. And the one thing that really motivated me when I got up to the door, and that's a special program because it's the only program in the world where the first time you go out, you're not hooked up to a guideline, or you don't have somebody strapped to your back. You're completely on your own. And the one thing that got me through that is I knew a guy who had done that program. And I kept telling myself, if that guy could do it, I know I can do it. And so when I look at political candidates, that's another way I would encourage MAPL students to think about it. Look at the candidates. If you see some candidates, you have to ask yourself, oh my goodness, if that person can serve, and we have candidates across the spectrum. That's when I decided, I'm not worried about whether or not I'm qualified. And so that's what convinced me to go forward.
How did you feel that your military service was received as part of your overall message? Was it something, I would imagine in a red state, that you have folks who kind of herald service and look at it in a positive light? Was it beneficial to you? Did you even use it as part of your campaign and your message? Do you think it helped or hindered at all?
It absolutely helped in the fact that when I would go out canvassing, I would always introduce myself. Hey, retired Air Force, running for office as a Democrat. And one of the most common things I would hear from Republicans that I meet with is, why aren't you running as a Republican? Sort of, what's wrong with you? You're on the wrong side. But I'd remind them in Iowa, we had a state senator for many terms who was retired. Well, not retired, but he served in the Navy, Tom Harkin. And Iowa has always had this deep appreciation for the military. Right now, Joni Ernst, our female senator, she's former Army. I think she's out now. She was in the Army National Guard. And of course, we had retired Admiral Franken running against Senator Grassley, gave him his biggest scare that he's had in 40 some years of being a senator. So I do think it does help. And the way it helps is talking to other Democrats. If they go into a house and they say, hey, I'm a Democrat, a lot of times the door just slams shut in their face. But when I would start off by saying, hey, I'm retired Air Force, people would pause and they would at least give me the courtesy of listening, even if they didn't disagree with me. So I do think it helps. But in terms of the overall effect, nope. Iowa right now is a very red state. And I'm not convinced, though, that it's a permanently red state. We've gone through stretches like this before. And I think it's a matter of time before people sort of, weigh their options and realize that, there might be a better way to go forward to help working families.
What are the big topics right now politically in Iowa? Is it reflective of the country as a whole, or are there some things that are more unique to that state right now?
One thing that really surprised me in this election in Iowa is that we didn't see a larger turnout from Democrats and independents, especially on the abortion issue, because our governor is trying to push forward a 6-week heartbeat bill. There are exceptions that they're looking at, in cases of rape, incest, or the health of the mother. But I thought we would see a stronger pushback, especially from female voters, but we didn't see that in the midterms. So abortion was obviously a key issue. Another hot issue here is a push to use school vouchers, to use taxpayer money to support private schools. When you see polling on both sides of the party, this is not a popular issue. There were several Republicans who voted against this in the last legislative session. The governor went out of her way to endorse other candidates for those Republicans who voted against her, and in each of those races, they lost. So this is an issue that when you see the polling overwhelmingly, Iowans do not favor the use of taxpayer dollars to support private schools. Another issue we're dealing with here are carbon capture pipelines, CO2 pipelines. This is an issue because the state wants to use eminent domain. And if you know anything about eminent domain law, eminent domain is really designed as a sort of last option. I mean, and it has to be, to me, clear and evident public benefit. And so the idea behind the carbon captures is we have some ethanol plants, some fertilizer plants, and they want to take the CO2 being produced by these plants, turn it into a liquid, pressurize it, ship it across hundreds of miles, 600-700 miles through these pressurized pipes, and then bury it about a mile underground. And that all sounds good, but I've done the research. You look at the efficacy, these things don't work. It's really, there's a group, we have three pipeline groups, but the one that is really pushing it are two prominent Republicans, the former Governor Branstad and Bruce Ratsetter, who's a key player in the Republican Party. It's a money grab. I mean, they're looking at 11% guaranteed rate of return, all sorts of tax credits. But landowners do not like this because it's a private company. These are private entities looking to profit. And so the idea of using eminent domain, I mean, how would you like it if I came to you and said, hey, I'm going to take your car so I can go run an Uber with it and make money off of it. I'll give you a little bit of money but you're not going to have any say. I'm just taking your car. And so we've had farmers in the state following lawsuits, not allowing surveyors on their land. They don't want this. The other thing, these pressurized pipes are dangerous. They have one that blew out in Mississippi. And when a CO2 pipe burst, you don't measure the danger zone in feet, you measure it in miles. So they actually had people, within 1-2 miles of this thing that were passing out in their homes. And they're looking at running these pipes literally just, 10, 20, 30 feet from people's front doors. So that's another issue that we're dealing. And then, of course, probably the key issue is labor shortage. And that's happening all over the country. Iowa's a special case. We can't hold on to our college graduates. When you look at the numbers, in terms of college graduates produced versus the number in the state, we're about negative 34%, which is not good. Our neighbor Illinois is plus 20%. States like New York are almost plus 40%. And so we've had this brain drain. It's ongoing, and that's systemic. That ties back. We used to have one of the best public education systems in the country. Under the current rule, public education's been grossly defunded. We're seeing a teacher crisis. Lots of teachers have quit. So what once was a top 5 K-12 public system is now in the bottom 25. And I tell people in the military, when my wife and I got reassigned, the first thing we looked at were school districts. If you're going to live off base, you want your kids going to a quality school. And so if you think about people looking at, should I move to Iowa, Illinois, Minnesota? Well, Minnesota's top 5, Iowa's bottom 25. That's an easy solution. And so you combine that with something like a heartbeat bill. If I'm a young woman, why would I want to move to a state where they're going to take away my reproductive rights? And so not only am I not going to move there, I'm not going to let my husband or spouse move there, or my partner. So the things that are happening are actually putting up barriers for us to solve this workforce crisis and to attract working families into our state. So those are some of the top issues, not all the issues, but those are some of the key issues that we're seeing in Iowa.
That's really fascinating. And it seems like there's several of those things, if not all 4 of them, could help to kind of sway voters. But you said that the anticipation of the female voter in abortion, it just wasn't there. But I'm interested to know if in the future the ethanol in the pipeline issue will sway voters more over to voting for a Democratic candidate who would be against it, or looking for other alternative solutions to that, considering how dangerous it is.
The Democrat brand right now in Iowa, I think the brand is still suffering after the summer of riots, the George Floyd, and sort of the cancellation of the white male. I think in rural America, where the population's 97% white, this idea that you're seeing national figures that are criticized and it's accurate. I mean, what's happening? You look at Thomas Jefferson. Should we be holding him up as this great American icon when that he was a slave owner and he had these other issues? And so from the rural perspective, they're seeing this sort of only looking at the downsides or the negatives of what white males have brought to the world, and not giving credit. So that, and not just that, but the idea of defunding the police, that is a message that's never resonated well in the rural area. And of course it's not going to, because there clearly is a rural-urban divide. But a lot of these issues that popped up in that time frame, national issues, these are carrying over into these local elections. And that is something else that I would hear, is a sort of, Republican disgust of what the Democratic Party stands for. And even though you try explaining to them that, hey, look, I'm interested in state of Iowa issues, I'm not looking at these national issues, but those national issues very much so, filter down to the kitchen table of these rural areas. And so I think still, because I have people flat out ask me, how do you feel about the law enforcement? And I would tell them, I'm former military. Of course I support the law enforcement. What we do is a lot of law enforcement are in the military, and the types of duties we do are not that far apart. And so we get what it's like to do that challenging kind of work. But just the fact that as a veteran, I have to explain this to someone, and I have to sort of remind them that, no, I'm not anti-law enforcement. That tells me that, that the Democratic brand in these rural areas either needs to be fixed or addressed, or B, time heals all wounds. And I do believe that eventually we're going to see the economic impact, because we have a lot of families struggling. We have a weird situation in Iowa where we have record low unemployment, and yet we have record high numbers of family needing food assistance. And we've got lots of families living paycheck to paycheck, even though they're employed. We have a number of people working, 1, 2, 3 different jobs to make ends meet. So to me, it's just a matter of time before, the rural voters start seeing beyond these sort of cultural issues and start paying more attention to pocketbook issues. And then the Democratic Party will be more appealing to them when they see it right now. But I'm not convinced that they fully feel it at this point. I think once they actually feel it, once they actually have to go to a food pantry 2-3 times, once they the governor here cut unemployment benefits by 10 weeks. You used to be able to get 26 weeks. She knocked it down to 16 weeks. Once those unemployment benefits start running out, then I think we'll start seeing more people asking if there isn't a better alternative to policymaking in Iowa.
Yeah, this dynamic you're describing is super interesting to me, because we always hear that that phrase, all politics is local. It seems more like politics is becoming more national, right? Like it doesn't matter who you put forth in some of these districts. It could be you could have a rock running for office, but if it has the blue D or the red R on it, that people are going to vote for it. So, yeah, and what are your thoughts on this caucus situation? Like, where do you think it's going to impact the dynamics of like the energy of the party in the state? Or by the way, that's the shifting of the caucus from Iowa to South Carolina. Is that final yet? I don't know if it's final.
Yeah, it sounds like it's going to happen. But I mean, it's going to happen. I know that, and this is where I, as sort of a political novice, I'm not really invested in that issue. To me, it's like, whatever. I know those that have been involved in Iowa politics, they think it's important that we maintain, that first in the nation status. And I get the history behind it and such. But again, I'm new to this sort of industry or endeavor. And so for me, it just doesn't mean much. I've never participated in a caucus. So I get that people are upset but on the other hand, as red as Iowa has become, it does make you wonder, at least at this time, is it a good litmus test for determining early candidates? Its history has done well. I mean, Iowans picked Obama when no one else was really giving Obama consideration. There have been other candidates like that Iowans, but this is when Iowa was a purple state. And right now, it's not a purple state. It's very much a red state. The other thing I would comment on, this idea of if you're thinking about going into politics, you have Maple students who are saying, gosh, I don't know if I want to run as a Democrat in a deeply red I would tell you, go forward and do it. Winning or losing isn't the point. So I'm a professor, I educate, and that's how I've treated this entire campaign. You have an obligation to go out, and if you really believe in the values that your party's representing, go out there and preach the gospel. Go forth and challenge and at least try to get people to see that there's other ways to look at these issues. There's other considerations, because otherwise there's no voice. There's no one out there to offer. And then we get into this problem that, we really lose democracy if we don't have that debate and we don't have that back and forth.
Service members tend to move a bit. Do you think that when they run for an office, not necessarily being from that state or that county or that district, whatever, is that something that hurts? Is people, they don't feel like they're necessarily representing them because they're from somewhere else? Or can they use and play the card that we're military, we move, this is our job, it's part of our identity, it's part of what we do?
Yes and no. Like where I was at, I had 3 different counties that I was moving back and forth through. And so wherever you go, you're going to be unknown to somebody. And my opponent, he was from a city in Independence, Iowa. And so he's well known around Independence, but not so well known in some of the other small communities beyond Independence. I would also say that where I actually live is probably the deepest, darkest, reddest part of my district. So I could have been the mayor and the prom king and you name it, and it's not going to give me very many votes. But I will say, I did a little experiment as I was canvassing. I did take one community. I took Cascade, Iowa, and I made a point of personally. There's 1,200, 1,300 homes to visit, but I canvassed each one of those personally, and I did 8 points better in that community. So this idea, and this is a lesson that I've learned, if you're going to run, nothing is more important than those face-to-face conversations and getting out there and talking to people. You can walk in all the parades you want to walk in, you can make all the phone calls, but there is something to be said about just having that face-to-face conversation. Well, for me, it was an 8-point difference. But yeah, in terms of having moved around a lot, I don't, maybe on the first time you run, it'll have an impact. I'll see. I do plan to run again. But this is part of the process. Is the first election, very few are going to win the first time out. But you look at that first election, just trying to get name recognition, trying to get your name out there. And then once people start to get an idea of who you are, and it is also interesting, some of the invites you get that once you start running, you'll start getting invited to different community activities that normally you probably wouldn't go out and seek out on your own. And again, this is another way to continue to get your name out there.
Well, we really appreciate it, Terry. This has been a wonderful conversation. You're so generous with your time and helping us out. This is the culmination of our time here at Maple. And so getting this chance to have you on our podcast and have this conversation, we really appreciate it. So thank you so much for your time today. And we look forward to seeing you run again and wish you all the success.
You bet. And congrats, guys, on finishing up.
Thank you.
Outstanding.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right.
All right.
Take care.
Bye, Terry.